All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. It is a Victory Tuesday morning, of course. The Dallas Cowboys delivering an emphatic win on Monday Night Football at the Las Vegas Raiders. It was a big-time performance in multiple phases, and we'll get into the details of this win and some of the news that came out after the game. But first, let's get things started, as we always like to on this channel, with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And let's go ahead and pull up this post on X from Josh DeBow, a writer, reporter with the AP. He wrote, the Cowboys came into the game allowing 143 yards rushing per game, 4.8 yards per carry, and 30.8 points per game per allowed. The Raiders ran for 27 yards to average 2.3 yards per carry and scored 16 points. I think the big thing to jump out there statistically was the rushing yards. Obviously, the Las Vegas Raiders knew they could not run the football. When they tried to run the football, it was met with disaster, of course. 3 tackles for loss just on Ashton Jeanty himself in the running game, including the safety that, for all intents and purposes, iced the game in the fourth quarter. Listen, the Cowboys were just more physical than the Raiders were, obviously. Their defensive line, with the addition of Quinnen Williams, even with Solomon Thomas out due to injury, it just totally overwhelmed a beat-up Raiders offensive front. I mean, this wasn't even close. I haven't seen a line of scrimmage domination like this when it comes to the running game in Dallas's favor, and I don't know when, right? In terms of just a defensive line just obliterating another team's offensive line in the running game. Kenny Clark, Oso Odighizuwa, Quinnen Williams, Ezraku, I mean, you name it, the Cowboys' defensive line absolutely dominated. It was one of those weird games where, in terms of the run defense, didn't get a lot of Wilson, didn't get a lot of Kenneth Murray, didn't get a lot of Overshown saying, oh, are they making plays? What's a linebacker room look like? Because the defensive line dominated so thoroughly, he didn't get really a good feel for how the linebackers were defending the run because they really didn't have to do anything. I mean, that Kenny Clark tackle for loss when he absolutely obliterated the Raiders center. I mean, that's just one of those things. It was crazy. Ezraku unblocked for safety. He had a second tackle for loss on an outside run prior to that. So across the board, this was a dominant physical performance. Credit to the Cowboys defensive line. It was a big matchup in their favor. Their group, the addition of Williams, was clearly better than the Raiders. And give the Raiders credit, by the way. They knew it coming into the game. They didn't sit there and say, well, we're going to try and establish a run. They knew the Raiders offensive line could not block the Cowboys defensive line. They tried to go with a lot of play action, a lot of quick throws. It was actually a really good game plan by the Raiders, but the talent deficiency against the Raiders for the Cowboys side was just too much for them to overcome. And the Cowboys defensive line, their new revamped defensive line, had, of course, a monster performance. All right, let's get into some of the reporting. And I think the most important thing I want to talk about here is Brian Schottenheimer. I think my first thought at the end of the game, obviously, with the first game since Dallas is trying to overcome the tragic passing of Marshawn Kneeland, was that Brian Schottenheimer is undeniably the right man for the job. Now, look, I don't know if he's going to be the right man for the job long term. I don't know how many wins he's going to collect as head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Is he going to take them back to a championship? I have no idea. But he is the right man for this team at this time. And he showed it Monday night. And I think the biggest move he's made, and he's made a lot of great moves, was when he actually benched arguably his 2 best players on the offense, not named Dak Prescott. Nick Harris at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported it was a coach's decision to have Cowboys wide receivers CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens miss the first series. It was not injury related, as it was communicated to me. They missed some things. So there was no, after the game, there was no further clarification. This was basically the party line. Look, what happened here, who knows, right? People speculate, did they miss curfew? Did they miss a meeting? Were they late to a meeting? Whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is, and Troy Aikman actually mentioned it on the broadcast itself, is that this was a Jimmy Johnson kind of move. I don't even know if Bill Parcells would make this kind of move, right? I'm sure he would, depending on the situation. But this certainly was not a move that Garrett would have ever made, for sure. Absolutely not. Certainly not Wade Phillips, definitely not Mike McCarthy. This is the kind of leadership the Cowboys have been looking for at the head coach for a very, very long time, right? You've got 2 star players coming into a game out of the bye. I thought when they benched Trayvon Diggs going into that big Sunday Night Football matchup against the Green Bay Packers, I thought at the time that was a gutsy move and the right move to make if Diggs actually was speaking out in the locker room and being a distraction. He said, listen, man, primetime game at home. You're playing your old friend Micah Parsons, right? Emotional game, big game for Dallas. We're going to bench you. This is a big opportunity for you, Trayvon Diggs, and we're going to bench you, right? I thought that was a big statement. This was at a whole nother level. This was multiple players. This is primetime football coming out of the bye, obviously dealing with all the news and emotions, of course, the Cowboys were working through. And Shoddy right here says, listen, you, whatever they did, don't know, I'm not going to speculate any further. You don't get to start. right? You don't get to go out there with the first series. Tolbert and Flournoy will. And the Cowboys basically surrendered a series. This is the NFL. I mean, this is not for long if you have a couple bad series, a couple bad games. Shawnee knows how important this opportunity is for him as a head coach, as trying to, capitalize on this for his career personally. And he says, listen, you guys stepped out of line for whatever the reason it was, and I will willingly sacrifice a series to send a message. And of course, the message was received. Pickens had a phenomenal game. Lamb actually had a pretty good game as well. Late fourth down drop, notwithstanding in the red zone. Although I think that was, not a great throw from Prescott. It was still a drop, but I think a slightly better throw from Prescott, and it's obviously a walk-in touchdown. It had no effect on the outcome of the game, of course. But listen, this was a statement from Shoddy. This is leadership at the highest degree. And the way he kept this team together, the way he allowed them to work through the issues and prepare for this game, I talked about it all week. I did not know what the Cowboys were going to look like. And I said this a bunch of times just because from my personal experience, I don't know how you could prepare. I don't know how you could practice. I don't know how you could play a game with everything the Cowboys were working through, right? I just don't know, right? I like to try kind of draw on my own personal experience, whether playing college football or other instances in life, to kind of figure out, okay, what would the Cowboys do here? I tried to look at, historical situations. Hey, what did other teams do? And this was so just anomalous that we had no idea. At least I could say I had no idea what the Cowboys were going to look like. And look, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. Prescott had that fumble, obviously. They surrendered an opening drive where they didn't get anything because they wanted to send a message. The defense did allow some passing plays down the field. The Raiders, like I said, had a great game plan. They basically spammed first down play action for the better part of 3 quarters just because they knew that was their best chance to do anything offensively. There were some penalties that weren't great. Tyler Booker had a 15-yard penalty. I mean, it wasn't an ugly penalty game, but it wasn't perfect. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb's drop on 4th down, right? It was one of those games where it wasn't the most perfect performance of all time. There's always things you could pick on, things you could improve on, things like that. But I think they were well coached, well prepared, and they showed it. And it all goes back to Schottenheimer. Again, not just leading his team through the adversity of the Marshawn Kneeland tragedy, but leading his team by sending a message by benching 2 stars. Right, this is a message. Like, I remember Jimmy Johnson famously, I think it was Emmitt Smith was talking about Jimmy Johnson, and Jimmy Johnson was like, was very critical of Emmitt Smith, I think at a practice or something like that. It was very, very brutal to him. And after the practice, Jimmy Johnson, this is according to Emmitt Smith, came to him and says, do you know why I had to do that? He says, because if the rest of the team sees me get like that on my star players, they know they don't have a chance. If you're anybody else on the Dallas Cowboys and you see CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens on the sideline, you're like, okay, if those two guys could get benched, if those two guys could lose their starting moment, and it becomes a talking point, right? That's what everyone on ESPN, ABC was talking about. Like, why were these guys not playing? They're 2 great players, right? And it's because they stepped out of line or did something that was against the team rules. And at that moment, if you're any other player of the Dallas Cowboys, a coach, a scout, whatever it may be, if Lamb and Pickens can get benched, you don't stand a chance. That's leadership. That's coaching. The Cowboys have it. Shoddy, 100%, the right man for the job. All right, let's get into this next report. I think this is pretty interesting. This was before the game. Where was the list of the Cowboys inactives for the game. I think it kind of speaks a lot of where the Cowboys are as a football team. Damone Clark, Jaden Blue, Tranquise Bridges, Hakeem Adeniji, Jonathan Mingo, and Solomon Thomas. The Solomon Thomas one, obviously, due to injury, that kind of made sense. Jonathan Mingo, I think it just speaks to how bad that trade was last season. I mean, you could say as good as the Pickens trade was, the Mingo trade has been just a total inconsequential move. And I understood the Cowboys liked him coming out of the draft. At the time, I was like, it feels a little bit like a reach, but, maybe change of scenery would be good. Mingo, again, being inactive, it just speaks to, I get it. He's a depth guy maybe, but I don't know what role he plays, right? You literally had CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens that were benched, right, going into the game. They knew that going into the game. I think, obviously, they decided to do it 90 minutes before kickoff. So, obviously, even with that situation, Mingo's a healthy scratch, right? It's one of those things where, either he hasn't completely recovered from the injury, although the reporting is that he is pretty much good at this point. So, I think that Mingo trade, we can call that not a good deal for Dallas for sure at this point. Jaden Blue, again, the young running back that had a lot of potential out of Texas that a lot of people are high on, another healthy scratch. It's hard to figure out exactly what the problem is for Blue. Obviously he had flashes and a burst here and there, some limited touches earlier this season. Listen, at a certain point, you have to wonder what Jaden Blue has, in terms of what value he can provide. Now, I'm not saying his career is over, but certainly for the 2025 season, barring an injury at the running back position, Jaden Blue was given an opportunity when Miles Sanders got hurt, was out for the year, and he must not have done a lot of good things because, especially in practice, whether it was picking up the offense, blitz pickup, things like that, it just wasn't a situation where the Cowboys feel like Jaden Blue is worthy of being a guy who dresses. He was inactive, right? They said, listen, Malik Davis, we're going to activate him. And Davis did some good things, ran the ball hard, nothing too incredibly impressive, but that's all you're really looking for a running back in that situation, is to be the backup and just execute the offense, in those off snaps where you do not have your starter, Javonte Williams, in. Lipke stepped in and did a lot of those sort of, extra work kind of things as well. And so I look at Jaden Blue and it seems at this point, his rookie season is not trending in a good direction. And I think at this point, if you're looking for a young running back, I think your eyes turn to Phil Maffa, potentially down the stretch, not Jaden Blue. Bridges being inactive, that's just because Revel's back, right? Listen, Bridges, he had a rough game against Denver, got absolutely picked on. He's a guy that was traded for as a 7th-round pick from the Los Angeles Chargers right after training camp. The Cowboys needed depth at corner, right? They had all the injuries, but we knew when the reinforcements would arrive that Bridges was a guy that just was not going to be a serious part of the team, at least not at this point in his career. Listen, he competed hard and played hard in the opportunities. It's just the talent deficiencies were there, and boy, it's just a difference. I understand the Raiders' offense is not very good, so that's a big old caveat to throw out there, of course. But the reality is Bridges, even against, not the greatest receivers, the Washington had some injuries, a lot of injuries at wide receiver. Bridges played okay, not spectacular. He really struggled against Denver. I think Kalen Carson and obviously Revel really stepped up and getting a lot of reps, a lot of opportunities. Of course, Bland is there, Reddy Stewart getting nickel opportunities. So you look at Bridges and he just feels like the odd man out right now. And if you're looking for a depth corner, looks like that's Kyer Elam the rest of the way. Kyer Elam is sort of the veteran depth guy that step up if another injury happens. It doesn't look like Bridges, unless multiple injuries happen, is going to be that guy. And then finally, Damone Clark. It's interesting, right? It speaks to how much has changed since week 1 of the season. Damone Clark was pretty much was a starter, right? He was a guy getting a lot of reps, and now we're coming out of the bye, and he's just a guy who hasn't played at all, right? And I'm not picking on Damone Clark here. I'm just saying that just the amount of change that the Cowboys have been willing to go through, and the fact they've been forcing a lot of those changes. I mean, what we saw on Monday Night Football last night, I think, was a big indication of Shoddy's ideas in the front office of trying to figure out their guys, figuring out who can play and who can't. I mean, I remember week 1, if you look at the Cowboys, obviously this is before Quentin Williams and Logan Wilson, but they had Sanborn, Kenneth Murray, and Damone Clark were their linebackers, right? And you basically have 2 of the 3 are not even playing anymore. And then you've got Kenneth Murray, who's getting phased out or certainly getting a lot fewer reps, although he did have that nice batted ball, ended up resulting in the interception. And maybe that's the best way for Kenneth Murray, if we sidebar to Murray here for a second. Maybe the best part of him is to be just a guy who plays 40-50% of the snaps, and is limited in doing some things and can just fly around and not have to be an every down linebacker. Maybe that's what's best for him down the stretch here. Now, look, long term, I don't think he's an answer at linebacker for Dallas, but maybe that's better for Kenneth Murray. Maybe he's a guy that, listen, you play 40% of the snaps, you're a good veteran presence. Maybe that's a better role for you. And that's where the addition of Wilson and getting Overshown healthy can really mean a lot. Because if with those 2 guys, prior to the addition of Wilson and before Overshown got healthy, and obviously Sanborn being hurt and then basically being benched at the same time, it basically had Murray and Shamar James playing a lot of positions. Certainly Shamar James, but definitely Kenneth Murray, when you watch the film, playing a lot of positions they just weren't very good at least at this point in the season. Shamar James at this point in his career being a rookie, I think the reality is Kenneth Murray, there's some things he can do fine. There's some things he's not so good at. Some things he has some struggles with. I think maybe if they can find some things that he's consistently good at and let him do just those things for the most part, I think that gives him a lot of chances to be successful. Same thing with Shamar James, by the way. I mean, if you look at the Cowboys linebackers, they played 5 linebackers, right? When's the last time we've seen a team play 5 different linebackers over the course of a game? The Cowboys played 3 safeties, too, by the way. They played Marquise Bell, obviously got the interception a lot, along with Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker. I wonder how much of that was injury, like, hey, listen, we don't want to rush Malik Hooker back, or did they really actually like how Marquise Bell had played the past few weeks? I thought he had played poorly, but at least he played well enough for the Cowboys to believe he earned some repetitions there. So if you look at the position groups across the board, the Cowboys played 5 linebackers, they played 3 safeties, and if you look at corners, you look at, of course, Revel, you look, of course, at Bland, you look, of course, at Carson, you look at Reddy Stewart. So they played 4 corners, 5 linebackers, 3 safeties, and obviously a heavy defensive line rotation. They played a lot of guys, and a lot of new guys, and a lot of newer guys, even guys like Kalen Carson, who got a lot of action prior to the bye against Arizona. He basically was a full-time starter starter, Kyer Elam, was essentially benched. So this is a completely different team. I have no idea if this defense is going to look like the rest of the way, but it is a completely different team. It's going to be fun to watch as they go forward. All right, this next report talks about DeMarvion Overshown, and I wanted to talk about this just because I thought it was pretty wild stuff. Brandon Laurie writes this, and I think ESPN did the full article here. It's on ESPN.com if you guys are interested in go checking it out. Cowboys DeMarvion Overshown details his surgery from last year where Dr. Ella Trash had to remove 2 screws from a prior injury suffered in high school. It took them an hour and a half to get the 2 screws out, and he broke them out while doing it. From the report itself that Brandon Laurie got a screenshot of, Overshown said the surgery took 7 hours. When he was a freshman in high school, he suffered a tibial plateau fracture in his left knee. To repair it, 2 screws were inserted into the knee. In order for Dr. Ella Trash to use the patella tendon to repair the ACL on Overshown's right knee, the screws needed to be removed for a proper graft. It took them an hour and a half to get the 2 screws out, an hour and a half, Overshown emphasized, and he broke the mallet while doing it. It just speaks to, I think, one, the incredible freakish athleticism that Overshown has and just the natural God-given gifts. Because I think most of us with this kind of operation, I mean, walking without a limp would be considering a win. But it also speaks to the mentality, more important than anything else, of DeMarvion Overshown. Just the positivity, the work ethic, the mental toughness, the willingness to overcome adversity to where he can just have this kind of situation happen. I mean, he's had a bunch of issues with injuries, big-time injuries, of course. And every single time he's battled back with positivity, high work ethic, and really showcased why I think the Cowboys love him and why the Cowboys fan base, myself personally, I'll speak for myself, really love the energy and effort and just everything he provides his football team. You know, if you look at his performance last night, he had 1 tackle for loss, I believe, on a short pass to Ashton Genty. Outside of that, really didn't do a whole heck of a lot. I mean, obviously they had him on, my least favorite thing in the world, a pitch count, so to speak. But, I think going forward, he'll have a chance to make some more plays, obviously, getting into the swing of things, getting out there, getting through a game. I think he did anything poorly. I just don't think he had a lot of opportunities. The defensive line was getting so much pass rush routinely that it was just a party at the quarterback in a number of instances. I didn't see any, bad missed tackles or anything like that or missed opportunities. I felt it was a game where Overshown was not really needing to do a whole lot because the Raiders basically were trying to play action and attack sort of the corners, so to speak, of the zone defense and most of their opportunities, and then quick throws out, getting the ball out of his hand. But when he had the opportunities, like in the flat against Genty, he made the play, and I thought overall he played fine. And I think of all the guys that stepped up, all the new additions, Quinnen Williams did well, of course. Logan Wilson, mixed bag, but I thought, again, this is kind of what you would expect. Revel, I thought, was fine. 1 holding penalty was probably the only downside, but other than that, he looked the part. He looked like a rookie cornerback that had a lot of talent and a lot of physical gifts, right? And look, obviously, part of it is the opponent, right? The Raiders are not a good offensive football team, but I will give credit where credit is due. Geno Smith actually played a pretty good game, all things considered. With the pass rush he was dealing with and the lack of run game, he made good decisions, quick decisions. He managed that game extremely well. And I had been talking about Geno Smith, the Raiders, pretty much this entire season. As people were really negative about Geno Smith because of the interceptions. He's thrown a lot of picks. And as we saw against Dallas, that one was, he kind of forced it in his own coverage, but it was a deflected interception. But the point I made when it comes to Smith is that he's a guy that plays good football. He manages the game well, makes good decisions, generally speaking, reasonably accurate. And he's not super accurate, but he's good enough, has good mobility, can escape, as he did on a numerous number of occasions. Otherwise, he would have been sacked a lot more. But the reality is he's never been a guy that can carry a team by itself. And that Raiders offensive line is so bad, it just doesn't stand a chance. Bronk Bowers is a great player. Mayer is an underrated tight end. I think Trey Tucker's a decent receiver. I think Besh and Thornton, they're 2 young guys, are guys with a lot of talent. They just can't run an offense because they can't block. I mean, if you can't run the football at all, I mean, listen, what was it, 6 carries for 7 yards or 6 carries for 6 yards from Ashton Genty, and like 11 of it was on 1 carry, right? It was one of those games where they couldn't run the football in Dallas, and they've struggled to run the football all season. And I think that makes it really hard for the quarterback. But I thought Geno Smith actually played pretty well for the Raiders, all things considered. Obviously not a good outcome for Las Vegas, a good outcome for Dallas. But I think it speaks to the quality of the defense as a whole, where Overshown in his return didn't really need to do a whole lot. Logan Wilson, his first reps, was okay. And here's my point about Logan Wilson. I've said this a bunch. He's a C to C minus player. His job is to maybe stabilize some things a little bit. His job isn't really to go out there and be elite. I mean, I don't think anyone sees him as an elite player. He's a stabilizing force, and I think that's kind of what he's going to grow into, right? And listen, if you look at Revel, looked pretty solid overall. Kalen Carson continues to look good, right? Not perfect, but good. Jerome Bland had a nice bounce back game. Malik Hooker back in the action, right? Donovan Wilson back in action, right? listen, I think overall, obviously, again, it's not a great offensive team. The Cowboys with more talent look good. And it goes back to the talent deficiency statement we've been talking about this entire season. It's like, listen, when you're beat up on injuries and you lack talent, like look at the Raiders' offensive line. It's a great example of this. The Raiders' O-line has a few talented pieces, but overall it's not a great unit. And then they have injuries, and they just get physically dominated, right? Dallas has been on the other side of that, where they have issues in the secondary, and then they had some injuries. You just get dominated, right? It's just one of those things where like, well, how come? Yeah, how can you only run for 6 yards? And look, this is the NFL, right? That should never happen where you have a running back run the ball 6 times for 6 yards, where as a team you rush for 27 yards in a game. And I think about what, like 15 of that were on Geno Smith scrambles or something like that, right? It was again just a horrific rushing performance from the Las Vegas Raiders. But the reality is, when you have injuries and talent deficiency, you get disasters like that. The Cowboys have had their fair share of that on the defensive backfield. We've seen that this season. When they're healthy, they play a lot better. If the Raiders were healthy on the offensive line, they'd play a lot better. So a lot of people sort of look at these injuries and they look at these performances and they kind of discount the two things. They're linked. Injuries matter in football. That's why making sure you have a lot of depth is important, because if you're really top heavy and you get some injuries, you may survive, but at a certain point, you're going to run up against a team that can really just take advantage of your talent deficiencies. And that's exactly what happened with Dallas. And that's one of the reasons why you acquire talent. That's one of the reasons why, by the way, you trade Micah Parsons to get extra draft capital, to get Kenny Clark, and then use some of that to get Quinnen Williams. Now you've got a lot of talent. Now you can take advantage of those opportunities. And that's exactly what we saw on Monday night. Alrighty, this next report here is courtesy of John Machota. How Brian Schottenheimer has helped lead the Cowboys since the death of Marshawn Kneeland. He's not afraid to be vulnerable with us, and I think that's why he invites us to do this thing with him. A lot of credit to him. I respect the heck out of that guy. I think the most important thing with Shotty, and I talk about his leadership all the time, is authenticity. You cannot be fake. If players and people in general can see through a fake leader 100 times out of 100, we all have seen that, in our own lives, whether it's been in the corporate world or charity work, whatever it may be, where you have a leader that's inauthentic, they're fake, right? And you can see right through it, and people don't buy in. Shotty is 100% authentic with this stuff. It's undeniable. Now, he's not like a pushover. We saw him, of course, bench CeeDee Lamb, bench George Pickens. He benched Trayvon Diggs earlier in the season. He's made a lot of decisions where, like, listen, you're out. You're a guy that you're a healthy scratch, right? He's made a lot of tough decisions. A lot of listen, we're going to win football games. We're a competitive bunch. We're going to be a tough organization when it comes to those decisions. So he's been that for sure. But in terms of being the leader of men and being the actual coach and working with these players, he's been 100% authentic, even before the Kneeland tragedy. And I think that's so important for a head coach. And that's why I'm talking about a lot really today. And I think that's going to be a theme the rest of this week, is how Brian Schottenheimer was the right man for the job. Because I think the Cowboys, if the Cowboys, a lot of people, the word they use, the Dallas Cowboys under Mike McCarthy, and I hate this term being thrown around a lot, but there's a good team that isn't really a Super Bowl contender, right? What the word they say is a fraud, right? Another way for a fraud is you can describe as inauthentic, right? And I know I'm kind of reaching a little bit with the Webster's definitions here, but hear me out. I think the Cowboys under Mike McCarthy, and certainly under Jason Garrett, they have the talent. But as a team, they were not a great elite team, generally speaking. They had their moments. I thought 22, they could have been special. I thought 14, they could have been. I thought 16, they could have been as well. But the reality was, and I thought there were good teams early in the Garrett era also. But I think the reality is, if you look at the Cowboys for certainly Mike McCarthy and a lot of Jason Garrett, they had good players. They had a lot of stars. They had some future Hall of Famers, right? Franchise quarterback, Romo, Prescott the entire time, except for, of course, a few of those injury-riddled seasons. But they never lived up to it, right? They never felt like a team that actually was a real legit contender, right? You watch good teams, you're like, okay, this team's for real, right? They're well coached, buttoned up, a lot of talent, smart quarterback, right? They may not win games 40-10, right? Under Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys had games where they beat the brakes off of people. Garrett had those moments as well. But in the big moments against big opponents, they just never felt like a team that was, okay, this is for real. With the exception of some years where they were so talented and playing so well. I think 2022 comes to mind, and 2016 and 14 as well, where you're like, listen, these teams are so good, maybe they can be special just by talent alone. And X's and O's do matter, tactics do matter, and obviously I think this Cowboys coaching staff right now is pretty good at both those things, certainly on offense. Defense remains to be seen for the long term. But the reality is they just never felt like a real team. They never felt like a leader. They felt like a group without a leader at the top. And I don't mean to bash on McCarthy and Garrett here too much, but it just felt like it was, that atmosphere that people talk about, oh, it's a country club atmosphere. That's kind of what I'm talking about. It didn't feel like there was a guy in charge who literally was the head man in charge, right? That's why a lot of people said, well, Jerry Jones is obviously clearly running the show. I didn't think that was the case, but it certainly felt that way because Garrett and McCarthy and Wade Phillips too, if you go back far enough, it never felt like they were actually really running the team fully just by their personality and by their affect and by their moves. Brian Schottenheimer, completely different vibe. And that speaks to one other point I want to talk about. Jerry Jones is going to give Schotty a long leash and has full support, undeniably. Because do you think that Jerry Jones, if he actually truly had, and the Jones family in general, had total overall control, that they would allow for the benching of Trayvon Diggs? Do you think they would allow for the benching of CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens? No. Not unless they really trusted their head coach, not unless they really believed in Shoddy. And part of that is earned, right? And Shoddy has earned that throughout this entire season, making a lot of great moves, a lot of tough decisions. Obviously, season, again, it's not like they're undefeated or even a playoff team at this point, but give a lot of credit to Brian Schottenheimer for what he's done with this football team. Obviously, we saw that come to fruition Monday night. We'll have to see what happens the rest of the season. Of course, a lot of football left to be played, but I think he's done a really good job. And I think at this point, it's fair to say he was undeniably the right man for the job. So many people hated the hire in January. Now that we're in November, getting closer to December, it's clear, 10, 11 months in at this point, he was a good hire. He was a good pick, at least for this season, at least for this moment. All right, I want to talk about something I really liked at the end of the game here. Nick Harris pointed it out. So good show and good follow, by the way. If you're looking for a follow on X, Nick Harris is one of the best. He wrote, good show of sportsmanship by Brian Schottenheimer to his mentor, Pete Carroll. Cowboys lead 33-16 with 2:31 left, and he's kneeling it inside the 5-yard line. Yeah, so it was 33-16 after the safety. They do the onside punt. Cowboys recover it. They kill a bunch of clock. Lamb drops a 4th down conversion inside the 10. It better throw. It's a touchdown. But anyway, the Raiders get the football back. 3.5, 4 minutes to go. The game, for all intents and purposes, is over. They get 4th and 1 at like their own 18-yard line with 2.5 minutes to go. They decide to go for it, and Osi Odigizua gets a sack. And so now it's first single at the 6, 2.5 to go. At this point, 99 out of 100 teams, right, they run the football, and they essentially try to score, right, as much as they can. Because at that point, it was on the other, because it's obviously not under 2 minutes, it's not under a 2-minute warning. You can't physically kneel the football down enough to run out the clock. The Cowboys kneeled it 3 times, actually gave the ball back to the Raiders with 39 seconds to go. And it was clearly a move by Shoddy in respect to Pete Carroll. And I love this kind of stuff. I know some people like running up the score, and some people say, well, you're just playing guys. Listen, at a certain point, if the other team, here's my exception to this. If the other team is still playing when the game is over and you stop them, I don't want to say the bigger man, because that's not the right answer, not the right way to describe it, but you have the recognition that you've got this game won, and it's a respect to the other guys that you're not trying to humiliate them, because this is a tough business. You've been on the other side of it. The Cowboys have been on the other side of it, obviously against Denver and against Chicago as well. Although I felt the Bears game is one of those games that the turnovers really kind of derailed that one. But the reality is you can be on the other side of this thing, and I've always hated, personally, I remember when the Detroit Lions were obviously they were a great team last year. They came into Dallas and they just eviscerated the Cowboys. And not that they were trying to run up the score, but remember how they were running all those trick plays when it was like 41-9, 38-9, in the second half or whatever the score was. The game was clearly over. It was late 3rd quarter, early 4th, and there's no real point to it. And at the time in my head, one of the things that's always been passed on to me is that the football gods don't take kindly to that, right? And obviously it's sort of, the karmic aspect of it. Like, listen, what are you doing here? You won the game. The game's over. You're clearly the better team. You're going to get a win in the win column. Just get out of here. Show respect to your opponent. Show good sportsmanship. I know it's sort of a lost art in today's day and age, but listen, taking care of the opponent and having respect for the other guy on the other sideline is really important. And players, by the way, notice this. No player likes to get embarrassed. No player likes to get humiliated. Again, because the Raiders at this point, listen, they went for it at 4th and 1 with 2.5 minutes to go, down by 17 at their own 8, right? You have to just because you have to. You can't punt the football in that situation, but you don't want to. You're just trying to get out of the game. The 3 previous plays from the Raiders were, short throws, right? So it wasn't like they were throwing Hail Marys or anything. No, they're just trying to basically get a few first downs. I bet if the Raiders would have gotten that first down, they probably would have, ran it out, just handed the football off a few times, or maybe even kneeled it to end the game. But the Dallas Cowboys and Shoddy, again, I love the move here. Take the kneel down, show respect to your opponent. It's not a little thing, but it is, I think, it's not the biggest thing, it's not the smallest thing, but I think it's an important thing because I think having respect for the opposition, that's just good football karma, for lack of a better word, and I think it sends a message to your players. I think under Mike McCarthy, and again, I'm picking on McCarthy here a little bit. They would, I'm not saying run up the score, but they put pedal to the metal a lot, and they would turn games that were 28-10 or something like that into 42-10 finals or something, and just it would have games where it was kind of close for 3/4 ish. The Cowboys then just blew it open, and it's obviously fun as a fan. Oh yeah, you put a 40 burger on them or whatever. But the reality is, listen, at a certain point, you won the game, you accomplished your goal. Right, show respect for the opposition, and I think the Cowboys under Shoddy, again, it's a good move. I love it. I think the respect for the opposition element is an underrated part of playing in the National Football League. These players and coaches, it's a very close group on both sides, and I think it's one of the reasons why there are a lot of players when it came to the Mike McCarthy era, right, that the Cowboys, it didn't feel like there was a lot of good leadership connections outside of maybe Prescott and Cooper Rush with Mike McCarthy as a head coach. I'm not picking on McCarthy here, but there's a reason he wasn't picked up as a head coach. We'll see what happens if he gets picked up again. There's a reason he was available after the Packers fired him. I think there's a lot of people that just look at Mike McCarthy and they, just something about him they don't like, right? They don't like the way he carries the team and the way he leads the team. And people like the way guys like Shoddy do it, for example, and I think it's a good thing, right? It's a weird thing. It's hard to really quantify exactly, the value of it. But when I saw it happen at the game, and when Nick Harrison had the little blurb on it right here on the screen, I was like, yeah, it's a good move. That's an A move from Shoddy. Again, show respect to your opponent, your former mentor, Pete Carroll. You're not out there to embarrass anybody. What's a touchdown for you? Does it give you anything? Right? You don't have a player on your team right now. It's not like the final game of the season where you're trying to get someone a contract bonus or something like that. There's no point. Right? There's nothing to be gained here. You can actually only risk things potentially with an injury. This is just good football. Good to see it. I was a big fan of it here, the way they ended the game. All right, there's a couple stories I'm going to get to that don't directly involve the Cowboys, but I think they do from a tangential perspective from Sunday's action. This first one is from Pro Football Talk, and for anyone who wasn't familiar, Shedeur Sanders got his first live NFL action against the Baltimore Ravens. It did not go especially well for Sanders. Made a few okay plays, but threw an interception, took a couple sacks, and the Browns lost the game in the end, 23-16. And then Pro Football Talk has this piece where it's like the lack of a single first-team practice rep for quarterback Shedeur Sanders showed on Sunday. It's another byproduct of the Browns constantly building for a future that never comes to fruition. So there's a lot of people that came out in response to this story and stories of a similar ilk saying, well, listen, it's the NFL. You're not going to get a lot of, first team reps at all if you're not the starter during the season. And, obviously that's fair. But to a certain point, obviously the Cleveland Browns clearly are trying to find their quarterback of the future. Why have you not given Shedeur Sanders any reps at all in terms of first team reps with the practice? Why have you given them all to Dillon Gabriel? And a lot of people said, well, that's just how teams operate, right? The starter gets 99% of the reps most of the time. Like the backup never gets reps with the ones, or very rarely does. Okay, I get that. But Shedeur Sanders was splitting time in the preseason too with Dillon Gabriel. And I think that's really important if you're a team trying to find a succession plan at quarterback. Like the Browns are looking for the quarterback of the future, right? And they haven't given really Gabriel a fair shot, and they haven't given Shedeur Sanders a fair shot. So the future may never come in Cleveland, and this is why they struggle so much for the quarterback position. Now let's look at the Dallas Cowboys. I want to compare what they did with their potential successor in Joe Milton. Now, obviously, I don't think anyone's expecting Milton to take Prescott's job anytime soon, anytime remotely soon, and maybe never. But they view him as a developmental prospect that they really like at the quarterback position, certainly to maybe grow into a top-notch backup. He's had a few good moments this year, by the way. The reality is with Joe Milton, he's a guy that they gave all of the reps to in preseason. Right, they gave him a ton of reps in training camp. They gave him a lot of action. They didn't have him split reps with anybody, right? I think they gave Will Grier like a couple garbage time snaps in the preseason. And it just shows a different mentality because obviously the Cowboys were trying to build for their backup quarterback position. The Browns were trying to build for their starter. But the Cowboys treated their backup quarterback position developmental plan better than the Cleveland Browns treated their starter development plan with two rookies that they really like at some degree, Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. And I think that's a problem with a lot of teams. They don't have a clear plan, a clear strategy, a line of attack at the quarterback position, whether it's for the starter or for the backup or for a succession plan down the road. And I give the Cowboys, again, it's another good move by the Cowboys coaching staff here, Shoddy, Clayton Adams, and those guys on offense, saying, okay, we want to develop Joe Milton. We need to develop Joe Milton into a quality backup. We're going to give him a ton of reps in training camp, a ton of reps in the preseason, basically all the quarterback reps in the 3 preseason games. That was a clear plan, right? A clear developmental plan, and they've been sticking to that basically the entire month of August, to a lot of people saying, listen, I mean, Joe Milton's had a lot of ups and downs here. Is it worth, maybe do we need to get another quarterback in there? Should there be a quarterback battle? And what did the Cowboys and Shawnee do? They said, listen, we're trying to develop Milton here. Our goal is to develop Milton, not have a really good quarterback battle for the second string position. And the Cowboys stuck to that plan. Now, we don't know if Milton will develop or not, but if you contrast that to the Cleveland Browns, who basically had no plan, I'd rather be Dallas in that situation, right? And I think that's what happens with teams who don't have a clear plan. They have struggles. They're not ready for opportunities, and we saw that on Sunday with Cleveland. All right, the other report here that's tangentially related to the Cowboys is courtesy of Tom Pelissero. The Bengals coach, Zach Taylor, says Trey Hendrickson, their star defensive end, remains week to week and is doubtful again for next Sunday's game against the New England Patriots. So this speaks to organizational malpractice by Cincinnati. So obviously, up to the trade deadline and for a long time prior to that, Trey Hendrickson, going back to last season, was the guy a lot of people thought would be potentially traded from Cincinnati. And if you compare that again to the Cowboys and Micah Parsons, and I get it, apples to oranges, not the same thing at all. Parsons is better than Hendrickson. He's younger than Hendrickson. You can make an argument Hendrickson is maybe a better leader, more captain kind of player. But regardless, just focus on talent alone. Parsons is younger and better. I think that's a fact. But Hendrickson is still a good player. Still got a few years left in the tank. But the Bengals could have traded him in the offseason. He wanted to trade. He wanted a contract negotiation. If that wasn't going to work, he wanted to trade out of there. And they came up with a short-term deal. Hendrickson's going to walk this offseason. He's an unrestricted free agent, right? They have some void years left on the back end of the contract. I believe 1 void year to lower the cap hit. But the reality is he's a free agent. He's going to walk. And right now the Bengals are going to get maybe a comp pick in return, right? Like a 4th round pick or something like that. And there was reports at the trade deadline that they wanted at least a 2nd or 3rd round for him, or I think at least a 2nd, and no team bought because they're like, listen, we can just wait out 9 games, right? He's got a 1-year contract on it. We're not going to bite the bullet for that right now. And I think the Bengals, again, it's the organizational malpractice. They're going to move on from Hendrickson anyway, and they're going to get basically nothing in return. And that's what happens to bad teams, right? People criticize the Cowboys for the Parsons trade, and you can argue whether it's a good trade or not and the long-term drama and things like that, right? But the reality is they got a significant return on that. The Bengals are going to get basically nothing. And that's the difference, right? That's why if it's not going to work out with the player, get some sort of return on them. Get something, right? Even if you lose the trade or win the trade or whatever the talking heads talk about, you got to get some kind of return, especially on a good player, right? If you let a good player walk out the door and you get nothing, and if there was a market for him, I mean, there's a big market for Hendrickson. The Bengals actually probably could have gotten a really good 2nd round pick. They may have been able to squeeze a team for like a 2nd and a 4th or something like that. Not that that's a huge amount of money or a huge amount of draft capital, but it would have been something. Instead, they're going to let him walk in the offseason and get nothing. Bad organizations. The Cowboys with Micah Parsons, they got a heavy return on the investment. And I get it, different player, different situation. I understand. But there's enough similarities here where I think there's a good contrast between how the Cowboys front office ended up with the Parsons situation and how the Bengals front office right now has ended up with their defensive end, Trey Hendrickson, and his situation. All right, let's get to the comments here. This is from yesterday's video. Obviously, some of it is a little invalid, so I had to kind of parse through there because obviously the Cowboys played, so some of the stuff no longer is relevant. But we'll get through it all and respond to what you guys wrote. It's Juma of 3231 writes, glad you're feeling better. Everyone deserves a day off. So glad to see more people hopping on the Marist moving to safety train. From the eye test, it makes sense, but I don't know about his coverage grade. Then after a quick Google search, it seems that his coverage ability was one of his highest graded attributes out of college, but he struggles more in zone than man. That being said, give him a full season to work out the kinks, and I think he could potentially be a really good safety. It's an interesting idea, but here's another thing. What if the Cowboys just really like him as an outside linebacker? Right? What if they see Overshown and Logan Wilson long-term, with Shamar James being a backup, 3rd down guy, and Leofau being an outside linebacker? Is that more what they see? Is that more what they want? Something to think about for sure, but I do think there is some momentum there with Leofau getting safety reps. I do think there is something there. I just don't know what it is, especially with Wilson being gone after this season, most likely, have some decisions to make with Malik Hooker. And so that position is going to be wide open. Is definitely something to keep an eye on. But I don't think it's a move you can make in season. I think we're all in agreement on that. Certainly not at this point. David Moses 884 writes, "Don't worry about a Sunday show. We are watching football on Sunday, LOL." Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fair. Brant Schramm Landry pioneered trailblazers of strategy used by every NFL team today. Excited about the Cowboys front six tonight. Let's get 5 sacks. Go Cowboys. Well, Dave, I'm sorry to tell you, I think they only got 4. So I'm sorry. That's a bummer right there. You were close. But yeah, the front dominated. That's undeniable, for sure. But when it comes to Brant, Schramm, and Landry, yeah, it's one of those things that I just hate that they don't get the recognition they deserve. I really do. Gil Brandt, the father of modern scouting, Texas Schramm, the best GM, I think, in NFL history. Remember, this was when the Cowboys came to being, for anyone who's not familiar, in 1960, it was a different era in terms of how they handled expansion teams. It was, the Cowboys were given, you know, when you think expansion drafts, when their new teams come to the NFL, what happens is, and for example, the Houston Texans, when they came in prior to the 2002 season, very similar situation where, okay, you get to go around the rosters of every NFL team and pick players off that to fill up your roster. And obviously, teams can protect certain players. You have a lot of advantages, things like that. You're in a salary cap world, so you can go out and spend money at a similar level as other players. In 1960, it was not that with the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, they were 0-11-1, really struggled, of course, and struggled for a long time. But they had to completely rebuild from scratch, right? Because they did not have, the expansion draft was nowhere near as favorable then as it was now. And it was just a total rebuild, a total rehaul. And Landry came in and he established right off the get-go, we're going to run our scheme, our offense, our defense. And, you know, there's a lot of reports and a lot of great historical writing about this at the time where there would be like meetings. So it'd be like an offensive defensive meeting. And let's say it was offensive meeting was, at 4 and a defensive meeting was at 4. The offensive meeting would sit there basically in silence while film was running, while Landry would install his defense before going over to the offense and then working with them. Like his whole thought was, I don't care if we don't have the players yet. We're going to install things the right way. And when we will get the players, we will be ready. But we're going to install everything. We're going to go through the lumps. Right, there was a lot of people that felt early on in the 1960s that were like, listen, there was some reporting on this, and Landry was like, people were telling Landry, listen, if you simplify it a little bit, players were asking for it. If you simplify it a little bit, maybe we can figure it out and play better and win a few more games. And Landry was like, I trust the system. I want to run my system. It was a different era, right? It took Clint Murkison, who was the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, original owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and it took a lot of sort of patience from him and Tex Schramm, and of course the scouting from Gil Brandt, and they slowly but surely built a really good team with a lot of great pieces. Obviously, Danny Don Meredith, Don Perkins comes to mind. You look at Chuck Halley, of course, great find, Bob Lilly. I mean, you go to Pettis Norman, Frank Clark, who's kind of considered a castaway and who came in and did a really good job for the Dallas Cowboys. And, they built a team, and a lot of other guys too. You can go down the list here. There's been so many good players that they built over the years. Leroy Jordan came into the fold later, right? You could spend a lot of time looking at what the Cowboys built over really the early to mid 1960s through the 1970s, but it was a process. It was the greatest team build I think we've ever seen that was long and methodical. What Jimmy Johnson did later was one of the greatest short-term turnarounds, I think the greatest in NFL history. But what happened with the Cowboys in the 60s was the greatest long-term build we've ever seen. And that's why when they won 20 straight winning seasons from 1966 to 1985, along with 5 Super Bowl appearances and 2 titles and a plethora of other NFC Championship game or NFL Championship game experiences that was prior to the NFC-AFC realignment, the reality was there's been no team that has come remotely close to that, right? Most teams in the modern day of NFL, right, because of the salary cap, because of parity rules and things like that, things are always going to be much more short-term. We're never going to see again, maybe not even in professional sports, right? We've seen people in the NBA try this with tanking. It hasn't worked out yet, where you go through a long-term rebuild, where you install everything, you build your entire culture from the ground up, from literally nothing. You have the patience for 5 or 6 seasons, and then when it hits, and suddenly you're one of the best teams in football, and you're one of the best teams in football for literally decades. Haven't seen anything like that. Remember, the Tom Brady dynasty, that was Tom Brady, right? Obviously, he was there the entire time. The Cowboys, it went from Meredith, Morton, Staubach, Danny White, right? It was multiple quarterbacks, multiple different players, right? There's a lot of different volatility going on. Major cultural shift, too, by the way. 1967 America and 1980 America, completely different, right? If you look at things historically, 2005 America and 2015 America, pretty similar, at least in my experience, living through those time periods. So I think with Schramm, Brandt, and Landry, they don't get enough credit. I could talk about them for literally hours. And maybe in the offseason, when we have more time, I may spend time going through NFL history when it comes to the Cowboys. In fact, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about that during some of the slower times in the offseason, going through some history stuff. I wouldn't mind doing that. But yeah, I agree 100% that they don't get the credit they deserve. BWO Jack 32-26 writes, I think that Detroit not being able to pull up a victory over Philadelphia last night, which was Sunday night, might have made our mountain too big to climb for this year. We had an opportunity to get within a game and a half of the Eagles by beating Oakland, Las Vegas tonight, and the Eagles next week. I think we now have to win out, which is highly unlikely, and hope for 3 or 4 losses from the Eagles for us to make the playoffs. Our only possible chances to win the division because we will not get a wild card because of the strength of the other 3 NFC divisions. So to me now it's all about next year. We have a tougher schedule than the Eagles down the stretch. So Detroit not beating them last night was absolutely huge, especially since we get the Eagles next week and would have had a chance to pull within 1.5 games. Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm not a big believer, just me personally. Well, if you win this game, you're within a game, or you can go up 3 games with 5 games to go. It just win the week, right? You get to the scenarios in the final 2 or 3 games of the season, but just win the week and things will settle itself out. If you win enough games, good things will happen. Now, I've said this before, the Cowboys are obviously a rebuilding season. This is not a season to expect playoff berths or championship aspirations. We all know that. I think all the volatility, we now got the pieces in place to defense to evaluate the second half of the year. So we'll see how things go from that perspective. But again, I'm not a big believer in like, well, if they would have won that game and this other team loses, can they get within 2 or any of that? I just think if you just win enough football games, things will take care of itself. All right, this next comment is from Mike Fitzgerald C603P. Let's pray the front office realizes there is 0 chance for a championship until they can get away from the worst player contract in history. Who is tired of kicking the can down the road and pretending that a 4th-round career choker, that's a little harsh, that is 2-5 in postseason will magically become clutch and live up to his record-breaking salary? Yeah, I get that the mentality with Prescott. You look at his postseason record. You look at a lot of the performances in big games. Right, there's some concerns the fact that he's like won in a lot for trailing by double digits in the second half or something like that. Listen, I think anyone who tells you Dak Prescott is elite in the top tier quarterbacks in the National Football League, I think they're reaching. I think he's been good, not great. I think that's what he's been most of his career. He's had a good, not great season even this year, right? I mean, I think he was very good against the Raiders. Wasn't perfect, right? A little inaccurate at times. He's not a great deep ball thrower consistently. Put 2 footballs out of reach of Pickens at one-on-one opportunities. Was behind on a third down throw to Turpin at one point. Was scrambling outside the pocket, got loose with the football, sack, fumble. I mean, that happens, but, again, not great. The reality is when it comes to Prescott, he's good, not great. And that's who they have. That's what their quarterback position is. The problem is how many elite guys are there, right? I get it. Mahomes, Josh Allen, Burrow. I throw Stafford in there at his prime, Jackson for sure. But you basically run into 5 or 6 guys that are truly elite. I mean, for example, you talk to Packers fans right now, there's a lot of them that are like, I don't know about Jordan Love. Now, I disagree with that, but there's a lot of them that are like that. Right? There's even Bengals fans are like, listen, we got Joe Burrow in our roster, and boy, what a waste of an opportunity. You'll even have people talk about the Ravens and Jackson and say a lot of similar things. Is he clutch? Is he not clutch? The reality is there's only so many quarterbacks that are considered elite in the NFL. Jalen Hurts has, for example, been to 2 Super Bowls. He's won one of them. A lot of question marks about Jalen Hurts from people in the Philadelphia fan base, right? And I'm a big fan of Jalen Hurts. I love him coming out of school. And as much as I hate him doing well for Philadelphia, just for the rivalry's sake, I think he's a pretty good player. I think he's underrated in a lot of respects. But there's people in that Philadelphia fan base that don't like Jalen Hurts, right? You can find that everywhere, I guess, is my point. And I think, focusing on the negatives with Prescott, we all understand he's not in that elite tier, but he's in the good, not great tier, which means they're going to have a chance, right? If you're bad at quarterback, you don't stand a chance. If you're good at quarterback, you have a chance. And again, they have that succession plan. They have that backup development plan of Joe Milton. And we'll see what happens down the road. Ronald Alexander, 5517, has back-to-back comments here. He said, I don't want to thank you from YouTube. All I want to know is whether I get any of the money I pay them refunded because greed prevented me from enjoying what I am paying for. Talking about the YouTube TV, ESPN negotiation that finally was settled. One of the things I just liked about this, I wanted to highlight it here, is was that so YouTube has, when you guys comment, a lot of times they'll have AI generated auto responses. And it's one of those things, this is one of the few comments where there was an actually AI generated response, and you can see the two on the screen there. It's so funny that the comment is about YouTube and asking for a refund, ostensibly from YouTube TV. And this is what the YouTube AI responded comments were. Can you explain more about what you're asking about regarding a refund? And I'm not sure I understand your comment. Can you clarify? It's so funny to me that that's like YouTube. And I don't know if there's anything to this or not, but it just, the irony is not lost, or it's a coincidence, whatever you want to call it, where this was the one where AI has the two, from YouTube's perspective, auto-generated response about, getting a refund from YouTube itself. So I thought that was kind of funny there. He also commented on Sunday, content about Dallas was limited, but the few who did make content was mostly crying about what other teams are doing as far as our playoff hopes are concerned. I don't care about the teams ahead of us now because all you can do is control what you can control. Exactly, 100%. I look at these final games as extended tryouts as we advance. At this point, I just want to see improvement from everybody, and if we win, it will shake out at the end. Ronald, I could not say it better myself. Outstanding comment, A+ from you. 230-9119 comments, no apologies necessary, Bo. We all appreciate your daily great content, win or lose, and a rest and recovery day from you is definitely warranted. Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. Obviously, I'm feeling like crap a couple days ago, and I try to record. It just was garbage. Because I try and do this basically like I would do it live. I just basically start recording and start talking. But I went through, the first 5 minutes, like I got to start over. I went through 5 minutes again. I'm like, I got to start over. And I just like, it was just garbage. It was just a terrible show. And I just didn't want to put out a bad product for you guys. But, I try my best to do this every single day, post something every single day, because I'm a big believer in consistency. I think just in life, consistency is important. And I failed to live up to that. And, hopefully hopefully I won't have that issue again. But thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. All right, this next comment is from Abraham Cantu. Hopefully I'm Abraham Cantu. Whatever the handle is, I apologize if I get that wrong. He writes, if I am not mistaken, Leofau was recruited as a safety and then moved to linebacker. I think he can play linebacker, but these linebackers need a veteran to guide them. Yeah, I do think that was sort of the goal with Murray and Sanborn, was to be a veteran presence, and that didn't work out, certainly not with Sanborn. It doesn't seem to be that way with Kenneth Murray. We'll see if that happens with Logan Wilson. And I think that was a big part of Eberflus, by the way, to be the mentorship of that linebacking core. And I wonder now that they've got, a little bit more stable front defensive line, and they got more talent there, and they got the young guys back in the secondary with Revel, Carson, and you still have Butler and maybe even Trayvon Diggs, although I think Diggs is probably, if we're being honest, is being shuttled aside for, protecting him for his future career endeavors. I think if Eberflus could have had more time working with the linebackers, maybe things would be better in some instances. But hindsight's 20/20. But I do think Leofau, again, people brought this up, and I felt kind of silly because I was like, yeah, when's the last time we've heard of a linebacker moving to safety? And it turns out Leofau, was a guy who was recruited as a safety. Darren Woodson went that route, so I've been 100% wrong with my initial thoughts on Leofau. But I do think at this point, I don't think you move him to safety. I think he's doing okay as outside linebacker. We'll see how he does the rest of the season. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on for the future, for sure. Buddha Namaste 597 comments 100 fire. Thank you. I very much appreciate it. Kenneth Laberke 8216 writes, thanks for powering through, Nick. Feel better, bud. Thank you. I really appreciate you guys. A lot of kind words in the comment section below. You guys have been awesome. When I read through the comments from yesterday's video, a lot of it was you guys being really nice, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. It means a lot to me. It really does. And then Benjamin Garza, 9486, Diggs at free safety, ball hawk. Interesting thought there, right? If Trayvon Diggs, I think they just have to cut him for salary cap reasons, as much as I hate to say that. But if he were to return on a team-friendly deal, Jalen Ramsey kind of situation with Pittsburgh, where Ramsey has played a lot of free safety this season for the Steelers, kind of some analogous situations there. I mean, maybe that's the path forward. I don't hate the idea. I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. The question is, from a cap perspective, does it? And that's the reality with the Dallas Cowboys. Is it, because you live in a salary cap world, is it worth it to keep Trayvon Diggs as a really expensive free safety, new to the position late in his career? I think there's a good chance he gets cut as a salary cap, casualty, and ends up going to another team, and they try and move him in that position, which probably wouldn't be bad for Trayvon Diggs, to be totally honest, but we'll see how it all shakes out for him going forward. I just think with his injury and at this point in the year, and the fact that if we're talking 2026, they probably kind of cut him for salary cap saving purposes because you got to do something with Pickens. The Dak restructure helps, of course, that option on the table, but you want to make more moves this offseason. Javonte Williams is a free agent, right? There's some decisions that are going to have to be made, and keeping Diggs on the roster, as expensive as he is, just to try him at a new position, I don't know if that's the right move. But from a skill set, it makes a lot of sense for sure. All right, guys, that's the comments for today. Obviously, a big Cowboys victory. Always enjoy the wins, guys. That's sort of, the players have a 24-hour rule, right? You have 24 hours till after the win to enjoy it. I say fans, we get 48, right? At least you get 2 full days. So you have till Wednesday night in my book to enjoy the win and kind of recap it. And we got a lot of great stuff coming for you. Got some film reviews coming out this week, so keep your eye on those. Excited to break down what the new and young Cowboys did in Monday Night Football. So I'll keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'll be here every day going forward, of course, breaking down all things Cowboys, starting with tomorrow morning. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.